For 16 years, Amos Whitaker had mastered the art of solitude. His ranch, tucked away in the rolling hills of central Oklahoma, was a fortress of quiet, a place where the world's troubles couldn't reach him. But on a rain-drenched night in late autumn, a young woman kneeling at his gate would unravel everything he'd built, pulling him into a storm he never could have predicted. The rain came down in sheets, relentless and cold, turning the dirt road that snaked through Amos's property into a quagmire. He stood on his porch, a weathered figure in his late 50s, his graying beard catching the glint of lightning as it cracked across the sky. The storm was fiercer than any he'd seen in years, the kind that made cattle huddle in fear and turned the open plains into a battlefield of wind and water. Amos liked storms that kept people away. No neighbors, no visitors, no complications. Just him, his books, and the rhythm of a life he'd carved out after the world had broken him one too many times. He was about to turn back inside, the warmth of his wood stove calling, when he saw her. A shadow at first, barely distinguishable through the downpour, stumbling along the road toward his gate. Amos squinted, his hand tightening on the porch railing. Nobody came out here. The nearest town, Elkwood, was 20 miles away, and his ranch was deliberately off the beaten path, hidden behind a stand of cottonwoods and a barbed wire fence he'd put up himself. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick of the rain. But there she was, collapsing to her knees at the gate, her body folding into the mud like she'd run out of strength to go any farther. Her silhouette was small, fragile, her clothes plastered to her frame by the rain. Even from 100 feet away, Amos could see the way her shoulders trembled, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something raw. His gut twisted, a warning he'd learned to trust over the years. People brought trouble. People brought pain. People left you with scars that never healed. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, 16 years ago, when he'd walked away from everything and everyone he'd ever known. His first instinct was to retreat, to lock the door and let the storm swallow her. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't his problem. But something about the way she knelt there, head bowed, hands pressed into the mud, stopped him cold. She wasn't calling out for help. She wasn't pounding on the gate or screaming for shelter. She was just there, surrendered to the storm, as if she had nowhere else to go and no strength left to fight for it. It stirred something in Amos, something he'd buried long ago, a flicker of compassion that felt foreign, dangerous. He grabbed his shotgun from the rack by the door, not because he planned to use it, but because caution had kept him alive this long. Stepping into the rain, his boots sank into the mud, the cold seeping through his flannel shirt as he made his way toward the gate. The closer he got, the clearer she became. She couldn't have been more than 22, maybe 23. Her dark hair was matted against her face, and her dress thin, cotton, and wholly unsuited for the weather, clung to her like a shroud. Her arms were bare, and as lightning flashed, Amos caught sight of something that made his blood run cold, dark, ugly marks circling her wrists, like she'd been bound with rope. Fresh marks, recent. She didn't look up until he was 10 feet away, the gate still between them. When she did, her eyes locked onto his wide, haunted, but burning with a defiance that didn't match her broken posture. "Please," she whispered, her voice so faint it was nearly lost in the thunder. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Amos stood frozen, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He'd heard those words before, a lifetime ago, from someone else who'd come to him desperate and afraid. That had ended in betrayal, in a wound that had driven him to this isolated life. He wanted to turn her away, to tell her to keep running, to leave him be. But those ice-toast damn ice held him in place. They weren't just pleading. They were daring him to walk away, to prove he was as cold as the world that had broken her. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gruff, barely audible over the storm. "Leela," she said, her lips trembling. "Leela Grayson." Amos nodded, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "What are you running from, Leela Grayson?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she pulled her sleeves down over her wrists, hiding the bruises. "What makes you think I'm running?" He tilted his head toward her wrists. "Those marks, the way you keep glancing back down the road, the fact you're out here, half drowned, begging a stranger for help in the middle of nowhere. Take your pick." Lila's eyes flickered with something maybe, or fear, but she didn't look away. "Maybe I just got lost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe," Amos replied, unconvinced. "Or maybe someone's looking for you. Someone who won't take kindly to me letting you in." The rain pounded the ground between them, filling the silence. Lila's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked defeated. "I won't bring trouble to your door," she said finally. "I just need a place to rest. One night. By morning, I'll be gone." Amos studied her, his years of solitude making him a keen judge of character. She was lying no about needing shelter, but about leaving by morning. Whatever she was running from, it wasn't something she could outrun in a single night. But there was something else in her face, something that made him hesitate. She wasn't just scared. She was broken, but not beaten. There was a fire in her that refused to go out, even in the face of whatever had driven her here. "You hungry?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Her eyes widened, caught off guard. "Yes," she admitted, her voice small. Amos jerked his head toward the house. "Come on then. There's a basin inside to clean up, and I'll heat some chili. Don't drip mud on my floor." He unlatched the gate, his hands steady despite the unease coiling in his gut. As Lila tried to stand, her legs buckled, sending her back into the mud. That's when Amos saw a dark stain at the hem of her dress. Blood, not mud. She was favoring her right leg, limping as she struggled to her feet. He stepped closer, keeping his distance to avoid startling her. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though her whole body shook. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, and her eyes held a hardness that didn't belong on someone so young. Amos led her to the porch, the shotgun still in his hand, though he kept it pointed at the ground. Under the dim glow of the porch light, she looked even worse gaunt, like she hadn't eaten in days. Her cheekbones sharp against her hollowed face. The bruises on her wrists stood out starkly, purple and raw, and there was a faint cut above her eyebrow, barely scabbed over. Inside, the cabin was simple but orderly. A single bed against one wall, a wood stove crackling in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with books Amos had read so many times the pages were worn thin. Lila's eyes darted around, taking it all in, like she was mapping every exit. Amos pointed to a curtain in the corner. "Basin's back there. Clean clothes in the trunk, shirts and pants, too big for you, but they're dry." While Lila cleaned up, Amos set a pot of chili on the stove, the familiar routine doing little to calm the storm in his mind. Letting her in was a mistake. He knew at the moment he'd opened the gate, helping a runaway because that's what she was. No question could bring all kinds of trouble to his door. But as he stirred the pot, he couldn't shake the image of those bruises, the blood on her dress, the way she'd flinched when he'd gotten too close. Someone had hurt her, someone she'd trusted. And that stirred an anger in Amos he hadn't felt in years. When Lila emerged from behind the curtain, wearing one of his old flannel shirts and a pair of pants cinched tight with a belt, she looked like a child playing dress-up. But her eyes told a different story. She sat at the table, and Amos set a bowl of chili in front of her. She ate like she was starving, spooning it down so fast he worried she'd choke. "How long you been on the run?" he asked, pouring himself a mug of coffee. Lila paused, the spoon halfway to her mouth. 2 days, she said finally. "Maybe 3. Who's chasing you?" She didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the bowl. "Nobody," she said, but the lie was as clear as the rain still hammering the roof. Amos leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Those marks on your wrists say different. So does the blood on your dress." Lila's hand tightened around the spoon, but she didn't look up. "I fell," she said. "Got caught in some briars." "Briars don't leave rope burns," Amos said quietly. "And falls don't make you look over your shoulder every 5 seconds. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "What do you want me to say? That I'm in trouble? That someone's after me? What good does it do to tell you? You'll just kick me out." Amos held her gaze. "I let you in, didn't I? Fed you, gave you dry clothes. Least you can do is tell me what I'm getting myself into." Lila set the spoon down, her hands trembling. "His name's Garrett," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Garrett Ramsey." The name hit Amos like a kick to the chest. The Ramseys were a powerful family in these parts, owners of half the land in Elkwood County and most of the businesses in town. rich, ruthless, and untouchable. If Leela was running from one of them, Amos had just stepped into a hornet's nest. "Your husband?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Leela nodded, her eyes dropping to the table. "We've been married 6 months. I thought he was different. Kind, at first. Charming." But then she trailed off, pulling her sleeves down over her wrists again. "Then what?" Amos pressed, his voice low but firm. She took a shaky breath. "He changed. Started drinking. Started hurting me. Said I belonged to him, that I'd never get away. Last week, he tied me to a chair in the barn. Said he'd teach me to obey. I waited until he passed out, cut the ropes with a broken bottle, and ran. Took his horse, his wallet. He won't forgive that." Amos's jaw tightened, his coffee forgotten. He'd seen men like Garrett Ramsey before, men who thought power gave them the right to break people. He'd run from that kind of cruelty once, buried himself in this ranch to escape it. But now it was standing on his doorstep, and he'd let it inside. "You should have told me who he was," Amos said, standing and walking to the window. He scanned the darkness beyond, half expecting to see riders approaching. "The Ramseys aren't the kind of people you cross and walk away from." "I didn't know where else to go," Leela said, her voice breaking. "I couldn't stay in town. His family owns everyone there, the sheriff, the judge, the whole damn county. I heard about you, the man who lives out here alone. People said you were safe." Amos let out a bitter laugh. "Safe? That's a new one." He turned back to her, and for the first time, he saw the full weight of her fear. Not just of Garrett, but of what came next. She was a married woman, legally bound to a man who saw her as property. Helping her wasn't just dangerous, it was illegal. If Garrett Ramsey came for her, the law would be on his side. Amos could lose everything, his ranch, his freedom, his life. But as he looked at her, sitting there in his too big clothes, her hands still trembling, but her eyes defiant, something shifted inside him. He'd spent 16 years running from the world, hiding from its injustices. Maybe it was time to stop running. "Finish your chili," he said, grabbing his shotgun again. "Then get some rest. We'll figure this out in the morning." Leela shook her head. "I told you, I'll be gone by morning." "You won't," Amos said, his voice firm. "Not in the storm, and not with him out there looking for you." She stared at him, her eyes searching his face for something, trust, maybe, or a reason to believe he wouldn't betray her. Finally, she nodded, picking up her spoon again. As Amos stoked the fire, the rain continued to pound the roof, a reminder that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one coming for them. He didn't know Garrett Ramsey personally, but he knew the type. Men like that didn't let go of what they thought was theirs. And if Garrett was coming, he wouldn't be alone. Hours later, as Leela slept on a cot by the fire, Amos sat at the table, his shotgun across his lap. He hadn't slept, his eyes fixed on the window. The storm was easing, the rain slowing to a drizzle, but the quiet felt ominous, like the calm before a predator struck. He thought about Lila's story, the bruises, the blood. He thought about the life he'd built here, alone, safe from the world's cruelty. And he thought about the man he'd been before, the one who'd believed in standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. That man had died 16 years ago, or so he'd thought. But as he looked at the girl sleeping by the fire, her face softened, but still marked by pain. He realized something that scared him more than any Ramsey ever could. That man wasn't dead. He was still there, buried deep, and he was waking up. The first sign of trouble came just before dawn. Amos was dozing in his chair when a sound snapped him awake, a faint jingle of spurs, carried on the wind. He stood, shotgun in hand, and peered through the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the world cloaked in mist. But through the haze, he saw them, pinpricks of light moving down the road. Torches, at least 10, maybe more, bobbing like fireflies in the pre-dawn gloom. "Leela," he whispered, shaking her awake. "Get up. They're here." Her eyes flew open, terror flooding her face. "Garrett." Amos nodded, pulling her to her feet. How many men would he bring? She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. His brothers, maybe, and hired men. "He's got money, Amos. He can buy anyone." Amos cursed under his breath. The Ramseys were a clan, tight-knit and vengeful. If Garrett was coming, he'd have his kin and a small army of mercenaries. Amos had faced trouble before, but nothing like this. He grabbed a box of shells from the shelf, his mind racing. The cabin was defensible, but not against a dozen armed men. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. "There's a storm cellar under the rug," he said, pointing to the floor. "Get down there. Don't come out, no matter what you hear." Leela shook her head, her jaw set. "I'm not hiding while you fight my battle." "This ain't your battle," Amos snapped. "It's mine now. You stay alive, that's what matters." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "He'll kill you, Amos. Garrett doesn't negotiate. He doesn't forgive." Amos looked down at her, then at the approaching lights. "Neither do I." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, the torches drawing closer. Amos positioned himself by the door, shotgun ready, as Leela reluctantly climbed into the cellar. He replaced the rug, his heart pounding. Through the window, he could see the riders forming a semicircle round the cabin, their faces shadowed but their intent clear. A voice cut through the morning mist, sharp and commanding. "Whitaker, we know she's in there." Amos opened the door slowly, keeping the shotgun visible but not raised. The man in the lead was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, with a lean build and a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. Garrett Ramsey, no doubt. Flanking him were two men who shared his featuresque brothers, probably and a handful of rough-looking hired guns, their hands resting on pistols. "Garrett Ramsey, I presume," Amos said, his voice steady despite the odds. "That's right," Garrett replied, nudging his horse closer. "And you're hiding my wife." Amos tilted his head, his eyes never leaving Garrett's. "Don't see any wife here. Just me and my coffee." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Don't play dumb, old man. That horse tied behind your barn? That's mine. Those tracks in the mud? Those are her boots." Amos cursed inwardly. He'd been sloppy, too focused on Leela to cover her tracks. 16 years of isolation had dulled his edge. "Maybe someone borrowed your horse," he said, keeping his tone even. "Happens all the time out here." One of the hired guns chuckled. "He's got guts, I'll give him that." Garrett raised a hand, silencing the man. "I'm only gonna ask once, Whitaker. Where's my wife?" Amos leaned against the doorframe, the shotgun resting casually in his hands. "Your wife ran from you for a reason. Looking at you now, I'm starting to see why." The insult landed like a spark in dry grass. Garrett's face darkened, and several of the riders shifted, their hands inching toward their guns. "You're making a mistake," Garrett said, his voice low and dangerous. "My family owns this county. You think you can cross us and walk away?" "I've walked away from worse," Amos replied, though he knew the truth was more complicated. The Ramseys weren't just any family, they were a dynasty, with deep roots and deeper pockets. Crossing them was as good as signing his own death warrant. Garrett dismounted, his boots splashing in the mud. "Last chance, Whitaker. Hand her over, and we'll pretend this never happened." Amos's grip tightened on the shotgun. The smart move was to give her up, to save his own skin. He'd built this life to avoid trouble, to stay clear of other people's messes. But as he stood there, staring into Garrett's cold eyes, he thought of Lila's bruises, her fear, the blood on her dress. He thought of the man he'd been before, the one who'd believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost. "Boys," Garrett said, his voice calm but deadly, "search the cabin." That's when Amos made his choice. He raised the shotgun, aiming it squarely at Garrett's chest. "First man who steps on my porch dies." The click of a dozen guns being cocked echoed through the morning air. Every barrel was now pointed at Amos, but his shotgun never wavered. "You're outnumbered," Garrett said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Even if you get me, my brothers'll bury you." "Maybe," Amos said, "but you'll be dead before you see it." For a moment, the world held its breath. The mist swirled around them, the torches casting long shadows across the mud. Then Garrett laughed, a cold, calculated sound. "You know what I think, Whitaker? I think you're sweet on her. Old hermit like you, alone all these years. She probably spun you a sob story, batted her eyes, and you fell for it." Amos's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't fire. "Shut your mouth. She's good at that," Garrett continued, stepping closer despite the shotgun, playing the victim. "But what she didn't tell you is she's a thief. Stole my money, my horse, my pride, and worse, killed my child." The words hit Amos like a sledgehammer. In the cellar below, he heard Lila's sharp gasp, muffled but unmistakable. 3 months married, Garrett said, his voice dripping with venom. And she threw herself down the stairs to get rid of my heir. That's why she ran. Not because of me. Because she's a murderer. Amos's resolve faltered, just for a moment. Was it true? Had Lila lied to him? But then he remembered the rope burns, the way she'd flinched, the blood on her dress. Even if Garrett's story held a grain of truth, it didn't justify what he'd done to her. Even if that's true, Amos said, his voice steady, it doesn't give you the right to tie her up like cattle. Garrett's smirk faded. She told you about that, huh? Had to restrain her for her own good. She was hysterical, trying to run off in the middle of the night. For her own good, Amos repeated, the words bitter on his tongue. Just like beating her was for her own good. I never. Garrett stopped, realizing his mistake. The admission hung in the air, and one of the hired guns shifted uncomfortably. Boss, the man said, maybe we should just go. Shut up, Garrett snapped. To Amos, he said, she's my wife. What I do with her is my business. Not anymore, Amos replied. Garrett's face twisted with rage. You have no idea who you're dealing with. My family runs this county. The sheriff's in our pocket. The judge owes us favors. You're nothing, Whitaker. A nobody. Don't need to be anybody, Amos said. Just need to make sure you never touch her again. That's when Garrett drew his pistol. He was fast, but Amos was faster. 16 years of solitude hadn't dulled his reflexes as much as he'd feared. The shotgun roared, and Garrett staggered back, clutching his shoulder as blood bloomed through his shirt. Chaos erupted. The riders fired, bullets splintering the porch railing as Amos dove for cover. Horses reared, their riders struggling to aim without hitting each other. But in the midst of the chaos, Amos heard something that chilled him to the bone, a scream from inside the cabin. Lila. Someone had found the cellar. Amos rolled toward the door, bullets whizzing past his head. Through the doorway, he saw one of Garrett's brothers, a younger man with the same cruel eyes, dragging Lila up from the cellar, his hand clamped over her mouth. Got her, the man shouted to the others. Amos had seconds to act. Outside, Garrett was shouting orders through gritted teeth, his shoulder bleeding, but his voice strong. Kill him. Kill the bastard. But the hired guns hesitated. Killing a man for hiding a runaway wife was one thing. Murdering him in cold blood while he protected a woman was another. Even mercenaries had lines they didn't cross. Amos seized the moment, bursting through the door and tackling the brother holding Lila. They crashed into the table, dishes shattering on the floor. The man was strong, but Amos had years of hard labor in his muscles. He drove his fist into the man's jaw, and the brother went limp. Are you hurt? Amos asked Lila, pulling her to her feet. She shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. He found the cellar while you were talking. I tried to stay quiet, but not your fault, Amos said, grabbing a revolver from the gun cabinet. Can you shoot? My daddy taught me, she said, taking the gun with steady hands. Good, Amos said, because this ain't over. Through the window, he saw 2 of the hired guns dismounting, torches in hand. The rain had stopped, and the dry wood of the cabin would catch easily. Burn it, Garrett shouted. Burn him out. Amos grabbed Lila's arm. Back door. There's a path through the woods to the creek. Follow it to the old mill. Then wait for me. I'm not leaving you, Lila said, her voice fierce. You stay, we both die, Amos snapped. Go, now. She hesitated, then nodded, slipping out the back door as the first flames lit the cabin's front wall. Amos reloaded his shotgun, his mind racing. The cabin was lost, but the barn was still standing, and his horse, Rusty, was inside. If he could get to the barn, they might have a chance. But as he moved toward the back door, a new sound stopped him cold, the crackle of fire. Spreading fast, the hired guns had thrown their torches, and the flames were climbing the walls, smoke filling the cabin. Amos coughed, his eyes stinging, but he kept moving. He had to get to Lila before Garrett did. Outside, the world was chaos. The cabin burned, casting an eerie glow across the yard. Amos sprinted for the barn, bullets kicking up dirt around him. He dove through the door, landing hard in the hay. Rusty snorted, startled but steady. Amos began saddling the horse, his hands moving with practiced speed. Leela appeared at the barn door, her revolver still in hand. "I told you to go," Amos shouted. "And I told you I'm not leaving," she shot back, her eyes blazing. Before Amos could argue, the barn door splintered as 3 hired guns burst in, guns blazing. Amos dove behind a stack of hay bales, returning fire. One man went down, clutching his leg, but the other kept coming. Lila's revolver cracked twice, and both men fell, clean shots to the chest. Amos stared at her, stunned. "Your daddy taught you well." "Had to," Leela said, reloading with shaking hands. "A woman needs to know how to protect herself." Outside, Garrett's voice rose above the chaos. "Burn the barn. Don't let them get away." But the hired guns were wavering. "This ain't worth it," one of them called out. "3 men down already. I'm not dying for your family drama." "Cowards," Garrett screamed. "I'll triple your pay." "Keep your money," another voice replied. "We're done." The sound of hoofbeats faded as the hired guns rode off, leaving only Garrett and his 2 remaining brothers. Amos peered through a crack in the barn wall. The 3 men were taking cover behind an overturned wagon, their faces grim in the firelight. The cabin was fully engulfed now, the flames roaring into the sky. "We can still run," Leela said, her voice low. "Take Rusty and head for the mill." Amos shook his head. "Running won't end this. Garrett'll come after you, today or tomorrow. This ends now." He stepped out of the barn, shotgun raised. "Garrett," he called, "just you and me. Leave your brothers out of it." "You shot me, you old bastard," Garrett shouted back, his voice thick with pain. "You think I'm gonna play fair?" "I think you're a coward who hides behind money and muscle," Amos replied. The insult did its job. Garrett stepped out from behind the wagon, his wounded arm hanging limp, his pistol in his good hand. "I'm gonna kill you slow, Whitaker. Make you watch while I drag her back home." Leela stepped out beside Amos, her revolver steady. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said, her voice cutting through the night. The final standoff began in a heartbeat. Garrett raised his gun, his brothers moving to flank him. But Amos was faster. His shotgun roared, and the brother on the left fell, clutching his chest. Leela fired twice, and the second brother staggered back, dropping to his knees. That left Garrett, alone, his gun shaking in his hand. "It's over," Amos said, his shotgun trained on Garrett's heart. "Walk away." "She's my wife," Garrett screamed, his face twisted with rage. "She belongs to me." "I don't belong to anyone," Leela said, stepping forward. "Not anymore." She fired once, and Garrett Ramsey fell to the ground, his threats silenced forever in the Oklahoma mud. The air was thick with smoke, and the acrid scent of burning wood as the first light of dawn crept over the Oklahoma hills. Amos Whitaker stood in the mud, his shotgun still warm in his hands, staring at the body of Garrett Ramsey sprawled lifeless in the dirt. The cabin, his sanctuary for 16 years, was a smoldering ruin, its flames dying down to embers as the storm moved on. Leela Grayson stood beside him, her revolver dangling at her side, her face pale but resolute. The bodies of Garrett's 2 brothers lay nearby, their blood mingling with the mud. The hired guns had fled, their loyalty bought only until the cost grew too high. For now, the fight was over, but Amos knew the war was just beginning. The Ramsey family was a force in Elkwood County, their influence woven into every corner of the town's power structure. Garrett's death wouldn't go unanswered. His father, Harlan Ramsey, was a man whose name carried weight from the county courthouse to the cattle auctions, a patriarch who ruled with an iron fist and a long memory. Amos had crossed a line, and Leela had pulled the trigger that sealed their fates. Whatever came next would be bigger than a few hired guns and a burned cabin. "We need to move," Amos said, his voice low but firm. He glanced at Leela, who hadn't taken her eyes off Garrett's body. "Leela, you hear me?" She blinked, as if waking from a trance, and nodded. "What do we do with them?" Her voice was steady, but Amos could hear the tremor beneath it. "We bury them," he said. No ceremony, no words. They made their choices. Lila's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. They worked in silence, dragging the bodies to a patch of soft earth behind the barn. The ground was heavy with rain, making the digging easier but no less grim. Amos's muscles ached. his body reminding him he wasn't the young man who'd once faced down outlaws in his wilder days. Leela worked beside him, her hands blistered but unyielding, her face set in a mask of determination. By the time the graves were filled, the sun was climbing, casting long shadows across the ruined ranch. "What now?" Leela asked, wiping mud from her hands. Her borrowed clothes Amos's old flannel and pants were streaked with dirt and blood, but her eyes held the same fire he'd seen the night before. Amos looked at the smoldering remains of his cabin. The barn had survived, along with Rusty, his old stallion, and most of his livestock. The land was still his, but the life he'd built here was gone. "We go to town," he said finally. "Talk to the sheriff. Get ahead of this before the Ramseys spin their own story." Lila's eyes widened. "The sheriff? Amos, the Ramseys own him. They own everyone in Elkwood. We go there, we're walking into a trap." "Maybe," Amos said, saddling Rusty. "But if we run, they'll hunt us forever. Harlan Ramsey'll have every lawman and bounty hunter in Oklahoma after us by sundown. We face this head on. Tell the truth, Garrett came here armed with his brothers and hired guns. We defended ourselves. That's the story, and it's the truth." Leela shook her head, her voice bitter. "Truth doesn't matter when the Ramseys are involved. You don't know them like I do. Harlan, he's worse than Garrett. Garrett was cruel, but Harlan's calculating. He'll make sure we pay, one way or another." Amos met her gaze, his own eyes hard. "Then we make sure he pays first." The ride to Elkwood was tense, the air heavy with the weight of what they'd done. Leela rode behind Amos on Rusty, her arms wrapped around his waist, her body tense as she scanned the horizon for signs of pursuit. The road was empty, the storm having washed away most of the tracks, but Amos knew better than to relax. The Ramseys would come for Theme. It was only a matter of when and how. Elkwood was a small town, its main street lined with clapboard buildings, a general store, a saloon, a bank, and the sheriff's office. The courthouse loomed at the end of the street, a brick monstrosity funded by Ramsey money. As they rode in, heads turned. Amos was a known recluse, a man who came to town once a month for supplies and nothing more. Seeing him with a young woman, a stranger in his oversized clothes, drew whispers and stares. They tied Rusty outside the sheriff's office, a squat building with a faded sign. Inside, Sheriff Tom Caldwell was leaning back in his chair, his boots propped on the desk. He was a heavy-set man in his late 40s, with a mustache that curled at the ends and eyes that missed nothing. When he saw Amos, he sat up, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. "Amos Whitaker," Caldwell said, setting his coffee down. "Didn't expect to see you in town." "And who's this?" "Leela Grayson," Amos said, keeping his tone even. "We've got trouble, Tom. Need to tell you what happened before the story gets twisted." Caldwell's eyes flicked to Leela, lingering on the bruises peeking out from her sleeves. "Trouble, huh? Why don't you sit down and tell me about it?" Amos recounted the night's events, leaving nothing out: Leela's rival, Garrett's attack, the shootout. Leela added details when prompted, her voice steady, but her hands clenched in her lap. Caldwell listened, his face unreadable, but Amos caught the way his jaw tightened when Leela mentioned Garrett's name. "So you're telling me," Caldwell said when they finished, "that Garrett Ramsey and his brothers came to your place with a posse, and you killed all three of them?" "Self-defense," Amos said. "They came armed, set my cabin on fire. We did what we had to." Caldwell leaned back, rubbing his mustache. "That's a hell of a story, Amos. Problem is, it's your word against a dead man's. And not just any Margaret Ramsey. You know who his father is." "I know," Amos said. "And I know you're in his pocket." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "Watch yourself, Whitaker. I'm the law here, not Harlan Ramsey." "Then act like it," Amos said. "Investigate my ranch. You'll see the burned cabin, the bullet holes, the graves. It's all there." Caldwell sighed, standing. "I'll ride out and take a look. But I'm warning you, Amos, this ain't gonna be simple. Harlan Ramsey's not the forgiving type. You and the girl better stay in town till I sort this out." "Stay in town," Lila's voice was sharp. "So Harlan can send more men after us? You got a better idea," Caldwell snapped. "Run, and you'll look guilty. Stay, and maybe I can keep this from turning into a lynch mob." Amos exchanged a glance with Leela. She didn't trust Caldwell, and neither did he. But the sheriff was right about one thing: running would only make things worse. "We'll stay," Amos said, "but you keep Harlan's men away from us." Caldwell nodded, though his expression was grim. "I'll do what I can." They left the sheriff's office and headed to the boarding house at the edge of town, run by a widow named Clara Hensley. Clara was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled into a tight bun and a shotgun she wasn't afraid to use. She took one look at Lila's bruises and Amos's grim expression and didn't ask questions, just handed them a key to a room with 2 cots. "Keep your head down," Clara said, her voice low. "Folks are already talking. Word travels fast in Elkwood." The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the street. Lila sat on one of the cots, her revolver on her lap, her eyes fixed on the door. Amos stood by the window, watching the townspeople go about their day. He could feel the weight of their stares, the whispers already spreading. By noon, Harlan Ramsey would know his son was dead. "You think Caldwell will protect us?" Lila asked, breaking the silence. "No," Amos said bluntly. "He'll do what's best for him. If that means handing us over to Harlan, he will." "Then why are we here?" Lila's voice was sharp, almost accusing. "Because we need time," Amos said. "Time to figure out our next move. Time to make sure the truth gets out before Harlan buries it." Lila laughed, a bitter sound. "The truth. Amos, the truth doesn't matter. Harlan will twist this into whatever story suits him. He'll say I seduced you, that you kidnapped me, that we murdered Garrett in cold blood. And people will believe him because he's Harlan Ramsey." Amos turned from the window, his eyes hard. "Then we make sure they hear our side first." "How?" Lila asked. "We're nobody. You're a hermit, and I'm a runaway wife. Who's gonna listen to us?" Amos didn't have an answer, not yet. But as he looked at Lila, her face a mix of fear and defiance, he felt that old spark again, one that had driven him to stand up to men like Harlan Ramsey. Before he'd retreated to his ranch, he'd spent 16 years hiding from the world, but hiding hadn't saved him from this. Maybe it was time to fight. By mid-afternoon, the town was buzzing. Amos and Lila stayed in the boarding house. But Clara brought them news. Caldwell had ridden out to the ranch with a deputy to investigate. The townspeople were divided. Some believed Amos's story, having heard rumors of Garrett's cruelty, while others were loyal to the Ramseys, whispering about Lila's supposed betrayal. The air was thick with tension, like a storm waiting to break. Around dusk, Clara knocked on their door, her face grim. "Harlan Ramsey's in town," she said. "He's at the saloon, talking to some men. They're armed, Amos, and they're looking for you." Amos nodded, checking his shotgun. "How many?" "6, maybe 7, Clara said. "Harlan's not with them, but they're his men. Rough types, not locals. Bounty hunters, I'd wager." Lila's face paled, but her grip on the revolver tightened. "They're here for me. They're here for both of us," Amos corrected. "Harlan won't let this go. He'll want blood for his son." Clara hesitated, then handed Amos a small key. "Back door to the cellar. Leads to a tunnel that comes up near the livery stable. If things go bad, use it." "Thanks, Clara," Amos said, pocketing the key. As night fell, the boarding house grew quiet, but the tension was suffocating. Amos and Lila took turns keeping watch at the window, the street below lit by flickering lanterns. Around midnight, Amos saw them 6 men moving down the street, their hats pulled low, guns glinting at their hips. They stopped outside the boarding house, spreading out to cover the exits. "They're here," Amos whispered, waking Lila. She was on her feet in an instant, revolver in hand. "What do we do?" Amos weighed their options. The boarding house was sturdy, but not defensible against 6 armed men. The tunnel was their best bet, but it meant abandoning Clara's hospitality and risking the open road. Staying meant a fight, and while Amos was no stranger to violence, he wasn't sure they could take 6 men. Before he could decide, a voice called out from the street. "Whitaker, come out, or we're coming in." Amos recognized the voice, not Harlan, but one of his lieutenants, a man named Roy Tate, known for doing the Ramseys' dirty work. Amos cracked the window, keeping his shotgun ready. "What do you want, Tate?" "You know what we want," Tate shouted. "The girl. Hand her over, and maybe you walk away." Lila's eyes blazed. "I'm not going back." Amos nodded, his decision made. "You heard her," he called out. "She's not yours to take." Tate laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Whitaker. Harlan wants her alive, but he didn't say nothing about you." The first shot splintered the doorframe, and Amos pulled Leela down as bullets tore through the window. Clara's voice shouted from downstairs, followed by the boom of her shotgun. The old widow wasn't going down without a fight. Amos grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her toward the back stairs. "Cellar, now." They stumbled down the stairs, the sound of gunfire echoing through the house. Clara was at the front door, her shotgun blazing, holding off Tate's men for the moment. Amos unlocked the cellar door, pushing Leela inside. The tunnel was narrow and damp, smelling of earth and mildew, but it was their only chance. They crawled through the darkness, the sounds of the fight fading behind them. The tunnel opened near the livery stable, just as Clara had said. Amos helped Leela to her feet, scanning the shadows for movement. The town was awake now, lanterns flickering in windows as people peered out, drawn by the gunfire. "We need a horse," Amos said, leading Leela toward the stable. Rusty was still tied outside the sheriff's office, too risky to retrieve. But the livery stable had plenty of horses, and Amos wasn't above borrowing one in a pinch. Inside, the stable was dark, the air thick with the scent of hay and manure. Amos found a sturdy bay mare and began saddling her, his hands moving quickly. Leela kept watch at the door, her revolver ready. "Hurry," she whispered. "They'll find us soon." As Amos tightened the saddle, a shadow moved in the corner of the stable. He spun, shotgun raised, but it was only a boy maybe 15, wide-eyed and trembling. "Don't shoot," the boy squeaked. "I'm just the stable hand." "Easy, kid," Amos said, lowering the gun. "We need this horse. Tell your boss I'll pay him back." The boy nodded, backing away. "You're Amos Whitaker, ain't you? Folks say you killed Garrett Ramsey." Amos didn't answer, just swung into the saddle and pulled Leela up behind him. They rode out of the stable, the mare's hooves pounding the dirt as they headed for the edge of town. Behind them, shouts and gunfire echoed from the boarding house. Amos prayed Clara was holding her own. They rode hard, the mare's breath steaming in the cool night air. The road led to a narrow trail through a stand of oaks, a shortcut to the next county. Amos knew the area well. 16 years of solitude had given him a map of every trail and creek in these parts. But as they rounded a bend, a figure stepped into the path, a rifle glinting in the moonlight. Amos reined in the mare, his heart sinking. It was Roy Tate, flanked by 2 of his men. They'd cut through the alleys, anticipating their escape. "End of the line, Whitaker," Tate said, his rifle steady. "Hand over the girl, and I won't put a bullet in you right here." Lila's grip tightened on Amos's waist, her revolver pressed against his back. "Don't," she whispered. "They'll kill you anyway." Amos's mind raced. 3 men, all armed, and only 1 horse. The odds weren't good, but he'd faced worse. "Tate," he called, keeping his voice calm, "you don't want to do this. You're a hired man, not a Ramsey. Walk away, and you don't have to die for their grudge." Tate laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I'm scared of you, old man? Harlan's offering $1,000 for the girl, dead or alive, and another 1,000 for your head." Amos's shotgun was slung across his back, too slow to draw, but Lila's revolver was already in her hand. Before Amos could stop her, she fired, the shot echoing through the trees. Tate staggered, clutching his chest, and fell. The other 2 men raised their rifles, but Amos spurred the mare forward, charging them. 1 man fired, the bullet grazing Amos's arm, but the mare's momentum carried them through, knocking the second man to the ground. Leela fired again, and the 3rd man dropped. Amos reined in the horse, his arm burning where the bullet had grazed him. Leela was trembling behind him, her breath ragged. "You okay?" he asked. "I had to," she said, her voice shaking. "They weren't going to let us go." "I know," Amos said, guiding the mare back onto the trail. "But this changes things. We're not just running from Harlan now. We're wanted." They rode through the night, the trail winding through dense woods until they reached a small creek. Amos dismounted, letting the mare drink while he bandaged his arm with a strip of cloth torn from his shirt. Leela sat on a rock, her revolver still in her hand, her eyes scanning the darkness. "What's our plan?" she asked. We can't keep running forever. Amos tied off the bandage, wincing as the pain flared. There's a town called Red Creek, 2 counties over. Sheriff, there's an old friend of mine, owes me a favor. If we can get to him, he might help us. And if he doesn't, Lila's voice was quiet, but there was no fear in it now, only resolve. Then we keep moving, Amos said. Across the state line, maybe. Start over somewhere Harlan can't reach. Lila nodded, but her eyes were distant. I never wanted this, Amos. I just wanted to be free. I know, he said, meeting her gaze. And you will be. I promise. They camped by the creek that night, taking turns keeping watch. Amos didn't sleep, his mind racing with what lay ahead. Harlan Ramsey wouldn't stop not after losing his son and 2 grandsons. The bounty on their heads would draw every gunman in Oklahoma, and the law would be no help. But as he looked at Lila, curled up under a blanket, her face softened in sleep, he felt a resolve he hadn't known in years. He'd spent 16 years hiding from the world, but he was done hiding. For Lila, for himself, he'd fight. The next morning, they rode on, the mare carrying them steadily toward Red Creek. The trail was rough, the terrain growing rockier as they left Elkwood County behind. Amos kept a sharp eye out for pursuers, but the woods were quiet. The only sounds the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. Too quiet, he thought. Harlan's men would be tracking them, and they wouldn't make the same mistake as Garrett's hired guns. Around noon, they stopped to rest in a clearing. Amos let the mare graze while Lila refilled their canteen in a nearby stream. He was checking the shotgun when he heard a twig snapping in the distance. He froze, his hand tightening on the gun. Lila, he whispered, get down. She dropped to the ground, her revolver drawn, as 3 figures emerged from the trees. They weren't Ramsey men, at least, not the ones Amos had expected. These were rougher, their clothes patched, and their faces scarred. Bounty hunters, drawn by Harlan's reward. Well, the leader said, a weary man with a missing front tooth. Amos Whitaker and the Ramsey girl. Harlan's gonna pay us a fortune for you two. Amos raised his shotgun, keeping his voice steady. Turn around and walk away. You don't want this fight. The man laughed, drawing his pistol. You're outnumbered, old man. Drop the gun, and maybe we'll let you live. Lila's revolver cracked before Amos could respond, and the leader fell, a bullet in his leg. The other two raised their guns, but Amos was already moving, firing the shotgun. One man went down, the other diving for cover. Lila fired again, and the third man screamed, clutching his shoulder. Stay down, Amos shouted, reloading. The wounded men groaned, but they didn't get up. Amos grabbed their weapons, tossing them into the stream. Tell Harlan you never saw us, he said. Next time, you won't walk away. They left the bounty hunters in the clearing, riding hard for Red Creek. The encounter had shaken Lila, but she didn't falter, her grip on the revolver steady. Amos couldn't help but admire Hirsch was young, but she had a strength most men he'd known lacked. By evening, they reached the outskirts of Red Creek, a small town nestled in a valley. The sheriff, Ben Harlow, was an old friend from Amos's days as a ranch hand, a man who'd once saved his life in a bar fight. If anyone would listen to their story, it was Ben. But as they rode into town, Amos's heart sank. A group of men was waiting at the edge of the street, their rifles glinting in the fading light. At their head was Harlan Ramsey himself. Harlan was a tall man, his hair silver, but his frame still powerful, his eyes cold and calculating. He wore a tailored suit, a stark contrast to the rough men around him. Whitaker, he called, his voice carrying across the street. You've got a lot to answer for. Amos reined in the mare, keeping Lila behind him. Your son came to my home with guns and torches, Harlan. I did what I had to. Harlan's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to Lila. And you, girl, you think you can kill my boy and walk away? I didn't want to kill him, Lila said, her voice steady. But he gave me no choice. Harlan's face twisted with rage, but he kept his composure. You're both under arrest. Sheriff Harlow's on his way, and he'll see justice done. Amos glanced around, his heart pounding. The townspeople were watching from their windows, but none would intervene. Harlan's men had the street blocked, their rifles ready. Amos and Lila were trapped, and this time, there was no tunnel to escape through. The sun was sinking behind the hills of Red Creek. casting long shadows across the dusty street where Amos Whitaker and Leela Grayson faced Harlan Ramsey and his men. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm or a bloodbath. Amos kept the mare steady, Lila's arms tight around his waist, her revolver hidden but ready. Harlan stood at the head of his posse, his silver hair catching the last rays of light, his eyes burning with a fury that promised retribution. The townspeople watched from behind shuttered windows, their silence a testament to the Ramsey family's grip on the region. Amos knew this was the endgame one way or another. It would be over tonight. Harlan's voice cut through the stillness, calm but laced with venom. "You've got nowhere left to run, Whitaker. Hand over the girl, and I might let you see a courtroom before I bury you." Amos's grip tightened on the reins, his shotgun slung across his back, too slow to draw against a dozen armed men. "Your son tried to kill us, Harlan. Burned my home, brought his brothers, and hired guns. We defended ourselves. That's the truth." Truth. Harlan spat the word like it was poison. "You killed my boy, my grandsons. You think your truth means anything to me?" Leela leaned forward, her voice steady despite the odds. "Garrett was a monster, Harlan. He beat me, tied me up, treated me like property. I ran because I had to, and I killed him because he wouldn't stop." Harlan's eyes locked onto her, his face a mask of cold rage. "You're a liar and a murderer, girl. My son was a Ramsey. He had a future. You stole that from him. He stole my life," Leela shot back, her voice rising. "And you let him. You knew what he was, and you did nothing." The accusation hung in the air, and for a moment, Harlan's composure faltered. One of his men, a grizzled cowboy with a scar across his cheek, shifted uncomfortably, his rifle lowering slightly. Amos caught the movement, his mind racing. Harlan's men were loyal, but loyalty bought with money had limits. If he could sow doubt, they might hesitate long enough for him and Leela to make a move. "Enough talk," Harlan said, raising a hand. "Sheriff Harlow's coming, and he'll take you both in. You'll answer for what you've done." As if on cue, hoofbeats sounded from the end of the street. Sheriff Ben Harlow rode up, a weary man in his early 60s with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He dismounted, his deputy, a young man named Illa, following close behind. Ben's gaze swept over the scene, taking in Harlan's men, Amos and Leela on the mare, and the tense silence of the town. "What's going on here, Harlan?" Ben asked, his voice calm but firm. Harlan pointed at Amos and Leela. "These two killed my son and my grandsons. I want them arrested, Ben. Now." Ben's eyes flicked to Amos, a flicker of recognition passing between them. "That true, Amos?" "Part of it," Amos said. "Garrett came to my ranch with a posse, set my cabin on fire. We defended ourselves. That's all there is to it." Ben turned to Leela, his expression softening slightly. "And you, miss, you got anything to add?" Leela lifted her chin, her voice clear. "Garrett was my husband. He abused me, tied me up, threatened to kill me. I ran to Amos for help. When Garrett came after me, we had no choice." Harlan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "She's lying, Ben. She's a thief and a killer. Stole my son's horse, his money, and now she's spinning a story to save herself." Ben's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on his pistol. "I'll hear both sides, Harlan, but I'm not taking anyone in until I know the full story. Amos, you and the girl come with me to the jail. We'll sort this out." Harlan's face darkened. "You're not taking them anywhere, Ben. They're mine." Ben stepped forward, his voice low but steely. "You don't run this town, Harlan." "I do. Stand your men down, or I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace." For a moment, it seemed Harlan might push back. His men raised their rifles, and Amos tensed, ready to grab his shotgun. But Ben held Harlan's gaze, unflinching, and after a long, tense moment, Harlan raised a hand, signaling his men to lower their weapons. "Fine," Harlan said, his voice cold. "But this isn't over, Ben. Not by a long shot." Amos and Leela dismounted, following Ben and Eli to the jail while Harlan's men watched, their eyes promising trouble. The jail was a small, sturdy building with 2 cells and a desk cluttered with papers. Ben locked the door behind them, his deputy standing guard outside. "Talk," Ben said, sitting across from Amos and Leela, "and don't leave anything out." Amos recounted the story again, from Lila's rival to the shootout at the ranch. Lila filled in the details of her marriage to Garrett, the abuse, the night she escaped. Ben listened, his face unreadable, but Amos could see the wheels turning. Ben was no fool who knew the Ramseys' reputation, and he'd seen enough of the world to know Lila's bruises weren't from a fall. When they finished, Ben leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "That's a hell of a mess, Amos. Harlan's not gonna let this go. He's got enough money and pull to make your lives hell, whether you're guilty or not." "So what do we do?" Lila asked, her voice steady but her hands clenched. Ben sighed. "I'll hold you here tonight, for your own safety. Tomorrow, I'll ride out to Amos's ranch, see the evidence for myself. If your story checks out, I'll make a case for self-defense. But Harlan's got the judge in his pocket, and the townsfolk are scared of him. This won't be easy." Amos nodded, knowing Ben was risking his own neck by standing up to Harlan. "I owe you, Ben. You owed me before," Ben said with a wry smile. "Now you're just digging a deeper hole." That night, Amos and Lila stayed in separate cells, the bars more for protection than confinement. Amos couldn't sleep, his mind replaying the events of the past 2 days. He'd gone from a solitary rancher to a fugitive in the blink of an eye, all because he'd opened his gate to a stranger. But as he looked at Lila, curled up on the cot across from him, he didn't regret it. She'd brought trouble, sure, but she'd also brought something else: purpose, a reason to fight for something bigger than himself. Morning brought new trouble. Ben returned from the ranch, his face grim. "Your story checks out," he said. "Burned cabin, bullet holes, graves. But Harlan's already spreading his own version. Says you kidnapped Lila, killed Garrett in cold blood. He's got witnesses, hired men who'll swear to anything he wants." Amos cursed under his breath. "What about the truth?" "Truth's only as good as the people who believe it," Ben said. "And right now, Harlan's got more believers than you." Lila sat up, her eyes blazing. "So what? We just give up? Let him win?" "Nobody's giving up," Ben said. "But we need a plan. Harlan's calling for a town meeting tonight, wants to push for a quick trial. If we don't have something solid to counter him, you're both looking at a noose." Amos exchanged a glance with Lila. They were running out of time, and their options were dwindling. But as he looked at her, he saw the same fire that had drawn him to help her in the first place. She wasn't broken, not anymore. She was ready to fight, and so was he. That afternoon, Ben let them out of the cells, keeping them under guard in the jail's back room. He brought in Clara Hensley, who'd survived the attack on her boarding house with only a few scratches. "I told the townsfolk what I saw," Clara said. "Those men came for you, shooting up my place. But Harlan's got people scared. Most won't speak against him." "Is anyone on our side?" Lila asked. "A few," Clara said. "The blacksmith, Joe Carter, knew Garrett's temper. And the preacher's wife, Mary, saw your bruises when you came to town. They're willing to talk, but it might not be enough." Amos nodded, his mind working. "We need more than witnesses. We need proof, something Harlan can't bury." Lila's eyes lit up. "Garrett's journal. He kept one, wrote down everything: his deals, his fights, even what he did to me. If we can get it, it'll show what kind of man he was." "Where is it?" Amos asked. "In his study, at the Ramsey Ranch," Lila said. "Locked in a desk drawer. I saw him write in it the night I ran." Amos looked at Ben. "Can you get us in there?" Ben shook his head. "Harlan's got that place guarded like a fortress. But I know someone who might help. Ellie's cousin, Nate. He's a stable hand at the Ramsey place, owes me a favor." The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. Nate agreed to sneak into the study that night. During the town meeting, when Harlan and his men would be distracted, Ben would keep Amos and Lila under guard, making it look like they were still in custody, while Nate retrieved the journal. If it contained what Lila said, it could turn the tide. The town meeting was held in the church, the pews packed with townsfolk eager to see how the drama would unfold. Harlan stood at the front, his voice booming as he painted Amos as a deranged hermit and Lila as a manipulative runaway. His hired witnesses backed him up, their stories polished but flimsy. Amos and Lila sat in the back, under Ben's watch, their hands cuffed for show. Clara, Joe, and Mary spoke on their behalf, but Harlan's influence was strong, and the crowd was swaying his way. Just as the meeting reached its peak, Nate slipped in, his face flushed. He handed Ben a leather-bound journal, whispering something in his ear. Ben's eyes widened, and he stood, interrupting Harlan's tirade. "Enough," Ben said, holding up the journal. "This is Garrett Ramsey's journal, taken from his study tonight. It's got entries about his business dealings Shetty once and what he did to his wife." Harlan's face went pale. "That's stolen property. You have no right." "I've got every right," Ben snapped. "I'm the sheriff, and this is evidence. Listen to this." He opened the journal and read aloud, March 12th. "Leela tried to leave again. Had to tie her up in the barn, teach her who's in charge. She'll learn, or she'll regret it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ben read on, detailing Garrett's abuse, his threats, his plans to bribe local officials. The townsfolk shifted in their seats, their loyalty to Harlan wavering. Lila's bruises, Clara's testimony, and now the journal were too much to ignore. Harlan lunged for the journal, but Ben's deputy stepped in, restraining him. "You're under arrest, Harlan," Ben said, "for conspiracy to commit murder. Your men attacked my town, and this journal ties you to it." The church erupted in chaos, Harlan's men drawing their guns, but hesitating as the townsfolk stood, their anger turning against the Ramseys. Amos and Leela were uncuffed, their story finally believed. Harlan was led away, his empire crumbling under the weight of his son's sins. In the weeks that followed, Amos and Leela returned to the ranch. The insurance money came through, and they began rebuilding. The new cabin larger and sturdier than the old one. Leela kept her maiden name, wanting no trace of the Ramseys in her life. She and Amos grew close, their bond forged in fire and trust. Though they never spoke of love, it was enough to have each other's backs. The town of Elkwood changed, too. Ben Harlow remained sheriff, his reputation bolstered by his stand against Harlan. The Ramsey family's influence faded, their businesses sold off or abandoned. Amos and Leela became part of the community, no longer outcasts but survivors. Their story a reminder that justice, though hard won, was possible. On quiet evenings, as they sat on the new porch watching the sunset, Amos sometimes thought about the night Leela had arrived, broken and desperate. That night had changed everything, pulling him out of his solitude and into a fight he hadn't known he was capable of. Leela, too, had found her strength, her fear replaced by a quiet resilience. "What are you thinking about?" Leela would ask, catching his far-off look. "Nothing much," Amos would say, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Just glad for storms." She'd laugh, the sound carrying across the plains, a promise that some battles, once fought, could lead to peace. What would you have done in Amos's place? Would you have opened your gate to a stranger, knowing the cost? Share your thoughts in the comments below, especially on the themes of violence and injustice. Tell us where you stand and why this story is meant to spark debate and reflection.